Hi, this is Amanda.
And this is Jen.
And you're listening to Just This, a podcast that explores everything around being and becoming a mother or parent.
We're excited to have you join us as we dive into the practical details as well as the unseen energetics on topics that span from preconception to years after birth.
So today we're going to riff on parent guilt, mom guilt.
Or just guilt in general. Everything's guilt in general.
So where do you want to start?
I'm actually really love this topic when you brought it up today. And I think partly because I hear a lot of guilt from moms. I would say less so in a clinic basis, but in a direct form. But from friends, I hear them say, yeah, I feel guilty because they want to do something, but they feel that they should be doing this other thing for their kid. For instance, I'll just use this one example that I have here, the most recent one, of course. And that's a mom wants to be there for her daughter and she babysits in the morning. We live here in Reno. It's cold in the morning, it's snowing, and she has a baby. And she lives close enough to somebody where they can actually drive the daughter to school very easily. And then she could pick them up. But the daughter doesn't want to go with this other individual. And so she has a lot of mom guilt about not driving her daughter to school, even though she's exhausted and has to get the baby up and ready and dressed, the whole thing. So I just think guilt is bad in general because energetically, I shouldn't say bad, right? Nothing's really good or bad in perspective, but it eats us up inside. And I think it's hard. I was telling her that with my son, it's definitely hard sometimes, but I also try to look at it like there could be worse situations. And also I feel that when we have guilt and we don't do what we feel that we should be doing, we don't do what's best for us, then our cup is not full and we're coming from a perspective of an empty cup. And then we're actually potentially almost worse parents.
Guilt's an interesting thing in general. I think it's a very interesting emotion and it's an interesting thing to look at and use as a reflection tool. Just like you had said prior, that's not good or bad, but I think when we can use it, be a little bit curious about it, that allows some space to get to maybe deeper discussions or deeper realizations about priorities or values, all the things. Guilt can start in pregnancy. I mean, we've talked about this in some other episodes. Specifically, there was one, we brought it up in the body image one and some other, I'm sure it's brought up in probably other episodes, but guilt can start even pre-pregnancy. You can feel guilty that you aren't able to get pregnant or that you have to do it maybe a way that was different from what you imagined. And then it can carry through pregnancy and definitely you'll experience it at some point after having a child. And it's very interesting to me to watch people, including myself, and to see the guilt that we may experience through the different phases and then later on look back on it and be loving to our past selves of being like, that was not a big deal. Why was I feeling so guilty over that?
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of the lesson in the journey in the whole levels and layers of guilt that we feel. One thing that helps me, I'm not sure if this would have helped me in the earlier phases of pregnancy and maybe the first year or two postpartum. Now that I am a parent, just thinking back to my own parent, and it helps me because now I have this realization of, oh, my parents did the best they could to an extent. And
they did the best they could with the information they had at the time.
The information they have and the position they were in. And this is something as EC coaches, we're always telling people is, you're not late, you're not wrong, you're doing the best you can. And I think that's one thing for parents just to remember is you're doing the best you can. And to give yourself credit and space for that. It is really easy though and hard when we live in a world and there's circumstances where maybe you do see your child crying when you're leaving. It's just heartbreaking and hard to be like, I have to go to work or I have to leave right now and deal with that. I think there's a balance. We are all intuitively so connected to our children, and there's a balance between leaning into the emotion, taking the space when you can to nurture it and nurture the situation, and also being in your mind of my child's in a safe space. it's okay if I give my child formula, whatever it is. There's so many things that people can feel guilty about. And I think when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, knowing that we're doing the best we can, taking the extra little 5 minutes when we can to nurture ourselves and the relationship in whatever way it is. And then also the biggest thing with the guilt thing, I think, is finding community, because I think that was one big thing for me after postpartum phase is the mom group that I went to, or the parent group at the birth center. When I would go and express things I felt guilty about, I would learn that a lot of other parents are dealing with this too, and I'm not alone, and I'm not the only one. And ultimately, there's two places I think guilt comes from. There's a separation between your intuition and like actual situation is giving you and what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the other place, so it's like an internal guilt that's because we don't even know it, but subconsciously we think we should be doing something a certain way because that's externally what we're absorbing and taught from society. It can be very easy for these two to overlap and to intertwine so much that we feel like it's an internal guilt where really it's just from external information or stuff we've been taking in. There's a lot of places I could go with this topic, but
when we do feel guilt as a mom or an individual or whoever, that maybe we just take a moment and be like, why am I feeling guilty about this? Right? What is it that's making me feel guilty about this situation? I remember when I first got divorced and moved in by myself and want to go take a bath every day for like an hour. And I felt so guilty about that because here I am, kids in school, and like I want to take an hour of the night to go do this. And I could do it after he went to bed, but I was so exhausted at that time. And over time, I just realized again, like I need to do this for myself because it plays out. And an hour is not, he's not 3. He doesn't need to be watched. He's fine. He could play toys. He can play video games, watch TV.
That to me, if I were listening to that, seems as an external guilt, right? You felt guilty because you felt as a parent you should be doing something a different way. So I think this is where the reflection is interesting and important, because a lot of times there is guilt where the child doesn't even care and you feel like you should be doing something different.
Yes.
And then the should is like, where's that should coming from? Is it because I actually want to be doing something different? Or is it because this is what I, in my mind, have been told is going to be the best thing for the child? But really, again, we know the best thing for our kids. And the best thing for our kids is always going to be making sure we're taken care of first before the child, because we can't take care of our kids if we're not taken care of.
And I think that's an interesting point too that extends out, because I realize that too, that there's this point where when they're babies, they actually do need to be taken care of kind of first, right? I mean, we have to take care of ourselves first, but they're completely dependent on us in a way that makes us feel, I don't know if you felt this way, but we have to put them first. If they're hungry, it doesn't matter if I need to like go eat, I'm going to feed them first and then I'll go eat, right? And so there's this training in our brain for the first couple of years, maybe, where we're constantly putting them first, that it becomes subconscious. And then at a point as they get older and we don't have to do that as much, it's not such a high priority.
I'd like to challenge that.
Yeah?
I really would like to challenge
that,
because yes, there's more demand for the baby at an early stage, but you should never put the baby first. If you are suffering as a parent, you should never put that baby above your mental health, above your physical health. I would never tell a parent to put that child ahead of their own well-being.
I agree with that. I would never tell a parent that, but that was just a personal experience when I first started.
Yeah,
as a mom.
I think like what you're trying to explain is that there's more demand and you start to feel like you have to be there all the time because there's a higher demand from a baby, versus as they become children, you haven't really sunk into that you don't need to be around as much.
I feel that there's this, as a mom, that we're supposed to be almost selfless, put other people in front of us first and foremost. I don't know if you felt that, and maybe that's a societal pressure thing where it's moms are the ones that are going in PJs. Well, why aren't they up and showering? Because dad has work. Mom works too. It's called taking care of the kids, right? And again, these are gender specific things, just generalizing here.
Interesting though, there is guilt. I think the parenting guilt is a bigger thing I've seen parents transition into being a parent and really be able to set boundaries and prioritize around everything else in life, but they still have guilt around certain things with their children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just an intrinsic, natural thing. I think, first of all, what we need to say is guilt will happen. You're going to feel guilt.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's natural to feel
Yes.
guilt. It's part of the process. And you will get past it, looking back on it. And it can be hard to get through. And when you're getting through it, I think the most important things to do are pull out and look at the big picture
Mm-hmm.
and then
Number
find
one.
support. Find
Yeah.
support and other people who've dealt with whatever it is you're having to deal with, whatever situation it is that you're in. We're pulling back and looking at the bigger picture. Often we realize it might be really, really, really hard, especially in the throes of pregnancy or that first year postpartum, to see it's actually not a big deal if I have to formula feed my baby a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
produce some growth spurts or whatever it is. Or it's actually not a big deal if I leave my baby for 3 hours while I go get
Mm-hmm.
some self-care or go to a therapy session because I'm losing my shit and whatever it is, or I'm super depressed. So there's elements of pulling out and looking at the big picture, which can be very hard to do. But I do think finding other people who've been in a similar situation, there's something about community and just humanity of when we realize that we're not alone in this, that all of a sudden really softens guilt a lot. I really feel like it does. Even if you're only finding a couple other people, it's like, oh, I'm not alone in this. Other people struggle like this too. Other people are doing this. Everyone's kids are going to be fine
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. And again, I think this part of seeing the bigger picture is realizing my child's in a safe space, my child's healthy, my child's surrounded by people they love, whatever it is, just kind of tapping back into that. And then again, I always find it helpful to think about the ways your parents fucked up and how you're totally fine, to be
Yeah.
honest. And if you've ever talked to your parents about the ways they fucked up when you were a kid, oftentimes they're like, I just did the best I could. And
Mm-hmm.
you realize as a parent, yeah, you did the best you could. You actually really
Yeah.
did. I believe you most of
Yeah.
the time
Yeah.
for most
And
situations.
I think too, that falls into the whole forgiving yourself as well. If it is a guilt from the
Mm,
past, forgive yourself. Don't do it again, right? Just don't, if you have some control over it, don't do it again. If you don't have control over it, then you did the best you could with the information you had at the time, for
yeah.
sure. So I think that's a good point as well. And I think too, guilt a little bit comes from trying to be and maybe also comparing ourselves to others. And I think that's why it's so helpful to hear other people's guilt, because their experience stuff. So you get to, in a way, kind of do what you were talking about, which is step outside yourself and see it from a different angle. It's always
Mm,
easier to see other people's problems because you're not in the mix of it. It's like, oh, that's them, not me. Even though it really is a parallel, pretty much same thing, just little different
or
scenarios.
put it in perspective, I think sometimes too. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
easier to see when you're looking at someone else. This actually isn't a big deal versus like
Yeah.
when you're in it for yourself, sometimes it feels like a huge deal.
Right.
On the forgiveness part too, I do like to highlight that examining the guilt, because if the guilt is repeatedly coming up about the same
Mm-hmm.
thing, then that's a lot of times when we feel guilt, I do feel like it will pass pretty quickly. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the earlier years or the first year or two, it might be something that comes up a couple times in a month, but usually within like 3 months, whatever it is, you'll pass that wave. If it's something that is repeatedly coming up, then it's a
Mm-hmm.
really great thing to examine and look at,
Yeah.
and do it with a journal, do it with another person, just be like, I've been feeling guilty about XYZ, and it can give you clues into, as I was saying, you're maybe shifting values or you're shifting priorities,
Mm-hmm.
and how you can make small shifts in your life. Talk to somebody or journal it out. How can I make a small shift here that might remedy what's at the core of this guilt?
Mm-hmm.
I also want to bring up, I think this is a thing, and maybe you know, they have different things like postpartum depression and postpartum
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. And I think postpartum guilt, I don't know if that's an actual thing, postpartum guilt. But if you're within the first 2 years and you're feeling extreme guilt all the time, that
Mm-hmm.
it could be wrapped up into a postpartum condition, such as postpartum anxiety or
Yeah.
postpartum
Yeah.
depression. And so
Yeah.
to not rule that out also, usually the guilt will be surrounded by other things as well.
I think that's true.
However, it can be a signal if you're struggling in a lot of different ways and you're feeling guilt to not rule out that you could be experiencing depression or anxiety or some of these other emotional imbalances that a lot of people can fall into postpartum.
Yeah. And I also want to say too, the one thing that helped me with the bath situation with my son, because it actually came up a lot. And at the time I was in a phase where I wasn't really talking to a lot of people about things. I was just working things out myself. And one of the things that helped for me, I remember, is just posing the question to myself, oh, this is interesting. Why am I feeling guilty? And then dropping it, not continuing, why am I so guilty? Why am I so guilty? No, just ask and like, oh, at some point I'll answer. Another point, I think the one that really helped was actually just going into it. Okay, if I do this, what is the worst thing that's going to happen? My kid watches television for an hour and a half every day. Is this going to go on the rest of my life? Probably not. Through that, I realized, oh, but when I actually take a bath, I'm more present with him. I'm more awake. I have more energy. And so in return, I realized him not having an hour with me actually gave him a lot more really focused attention and aware time, as opposed to me just wanting to be on my phone scrolling, as opposed to in a bathroom and actually getting the rest and relaxation that I really needed. I just want to say that too. Sometimes just go into the guilt, go into there and be like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Some mom's going to come tell me that I'm a bad mom because I'm taking a bath and not spending time with my kid. Okay, well, you don't live in my shoes. That's just another.
I think this also kind of tumbles into the whole thing of surrender that we talk about, and you just have to surrender so much in all of these phases, and in a lot of ways you have to surrender into your guilt to just see what happens. I find a lot of things around guilt are when we're very black and white about things, and it can be us or it can be society or what society's told us. Where I have a friend struggling with this right now. Breast milk is the best for your kid. Don't give them any formula. If your kids are older, don't give them any sugar. It's going to ruin them forever. Don't give them any screen time. It's going to ruin them forever. Be there for them all the time. Don't leave your children. Like, it's all these things, right? We're subconsciously fed. But if we are struggling with looking at the bigger picture, or even if it's what's the worst that can happen, because we can easily fall into thinking that it can be horrible. We can believe that if we do it this way, this will really ruin everything for the rest of their life. That feeling can truly exist within us. And sometimes I think just allowing yourself to surrender, even if you can't release that feeling, surrendering to the moment and surrendering to the unknown of what's going to happen. In our minds, it might be the worst case scenario, but surrendering to that can be helpful.
Yeah. I think the other thing is so interesting what you're talking. I remember the other one that I felt guilty about during pregnancy was that your baby feels every emotion that you do and then highlighted. And so supposedly if you get stressed or you're angry, they feel that and it's marked in their nervous system for life, that type of guilt for feeling things. But I really find it important to also realize that science says this, right? Like the only constant is change. So the fact that something's so permanent is really, in essence, not really true. I don't know if you're getting the correlation there, but if that makes sense.
Kind of. I don't know.
Kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I understood that full correlation.
Yeah. Well, just that things can change. So I guess my point is that even if we feel guilty, things change. Nothing is static and nothing cannot not be fixed. Let me put that
I think that gets to the point of what I was saying, whereas, and usually when you look back on it, even a few months later, you're in a totally different place. It doesn't seem that big of a deal. Guilt's just an emotion. It's like sadness. It's like all the other emotions, and understanding it's not bad. It's not good. It's something to ride the wave, to look at, to surrender to, and just notice and use it as, if guilt's coming up again frequently, then maybe it is something that can be wrapped up with something else, but it's just something to notice. It's just something, it's an indicator from our body. And we don't want to push it away, because when we push it away, usually that's when we start to feel more guilty.
Exactly. Yeah. I heard emotion explained as just energy moving through us. I like that.
Yeah.
It's like a simple thing. So guilt is just some form of energy moving through us if we allow it. But if we get stuck on it, like you're saying, then it's going to stay in us and really, really hurt us. The thing I want to say that really helped me with mom guilt, I really felt this message from myself which was at some point, I'm going to do something that traumatizes my kid. And maybe not traumatize might be a kind of a heavy word, but there's going to be some point in my lifetime as a parent that I'm going to do something that my kid's going to remember until they're adults. And we'll probably have a moment like we do with our parents, or maybe don't, and talk to them about what we remember and how we were emotionally overwhelmed at that moment. And that
Yeah.
just lifted a load off. I was like, you know what? Because it gave me grace. You're a human and you're not going to be perfect, and that's okay. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm also aware that, and I do this, like if I do mess up, I go and I apologize and make it right and try not to do it again. But
Yeah. We be loving people. We're learning with the children. I
yeah.
truly believe our kids are reflection mirrors for us. All relationships are. And our kids, I do believe in the whole we choose each other, we come here and we're all in our own little lessons and
Hmm.
journeys of what we're here to experience and learn.
We all choose each other.
And we're at some point going to do something that's going to quote unquote mess our kids up. It's interesting because I do think every parent hits that point where it's like, I'm human.
Hmm.
I'm going to do the best I can. I am doing the best I can. I'm going to make mistakes. And just as you said, we yell, whatever. We come back to, I always try to come back and say, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. Just
Hmm.
model for your children. They're
Yeah,
human too. They're going to be
exactly.
human. And the more we can model, the better
Yeah.
it is. But you also have that realization too, and my belief of, oh yeah, just as much as I'm here on my journey learning, they're here on their journey learning. And part of whatever is happening in our relational dynamic as parent child is kind of part of their journey, is part of the picture,
Yes.
is part of their healing, is part of
Yes.
whatever they've chosen to come here to learn. And not allow that to wipe your slate clean as a parent of what you're here to do and your responsibility. But it does help for me and my belief of how our universe systems work to understand this is just part of both of our journeys.
Hmm.
And we're both going to make mistakes and we're both going to do things that aren't perfect. And also, maybe they're not even mistakes. It's part how we're growing, expanding. Your guilt is part of how you're growing and expanding actually as a parent too.
Hmm. Yeah.
And how you relate to that guilt is going to be the most important thing in your growth and
Yes.
expansion with it. The
Absolutely.
other one thing I wanted to say on this that I find helpful and hilarious is if you're ever hanging out with another adult friend that has problems, you can just tell they're hung up on things that their parents did or that they're a certain way because of their parents. I don't know. You hit a certain point in your adult life and you're like, are you just going to be an adult or are we going to blame our parents for the rest of our lives? And I think
Right.
that also helps me realize be the best parent I can. And
Hmm.
your kid will grow up and be okay. I grew up and I'm okay. My parents
Yeah.
fucked up in some ways. And guess what? Once you hit like a certain point in your adult life, you have the power to take it and make magic out of it, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
I think it's
And the
hilarious sometimes.
responsibility.
Yeah, and
And
so
the
I think that
responsibility.
helps too. Hang out with an adult that usually they're adults that don't have kids. I don't know. That's my experience, but
Don't
yeah.
hang out with those people. Talk about their
Anyway,
childhood. Yeah.
yeah,
And for those people, they should go do some processing, really, because they're holding on to pain that really they should be either transforming
yes,
into something. It's not helping anyone just sitting there talking about it, but,
yeah.
transforming it. Yeah.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
two things help me. That's kind of what I was thinking when you were mentioning you. It is true. You do hit a point where you're just, you know what? It's not going to be perfect and that's okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe you hit that in your pregnancy. Maybe you hit that before you're conceiving and you're like, it's because this is going to look different and it's not the way I imagined or thought would be perfect. And it's still beautiful. No matter how you do it, if you have to have donor for part of your conception, all of it. I've seen
Hmm.
people have guilt over that too. And it's your intention and your love, really. That's what is at the core of everything. And guilt will come
Hmm.
into that and at some point, and that's okay. And just approach it with intention and love. And then everything will be totally fine. I
And
promise.
take proper action. Take
Yeah.
proper action. And I just want to say too, on the note of guilt, I think at times there's moments in our life where we have to pick between two shitty options, or maybe two options that we don't prefer, or two options that are extremely difficult to choose from. And I also think that going back with your intention there, if we set an intention that no matter what choice we make, we're going to make it for the best of us and whoever else is involved, then that choice will actually be the best one. And it should therefore free yourself from guilt, even if they're not the most ideal choices to choose from too. I just want to say that as well. But I agree, 100%, just kind of, I guess, melt into your imperfections.
To wrap up, do you want to say what you feel like you felt most guilty in your whole journey of parenthood? What's been the hardest guilt that you've dealt with?
Oh, hardest guilt. Okay.
Mine for sure was if my child was crying and mommy don't leave in situations where I needed to go. How did I deal with it? How did I deal with it? Those were the hardest for me. I think I learned there was phases in the growth. And when we were in one of those phases, I tried to adjust my schedule, allow more time, do more talking, read more books. You just do things. Again, putting the love and intention as much as I could into the situation around the guilt. Because that one was definitely not external societal guilt, but pulling back, remembering my child's with people that love her, my child's in a safe situation, and we're going to get through this. And then adjusting what I could for myself when I was able to, in order to. And again, time helps things pass. Kids go through phases and things will pass too. So
yeah.
Anyways, that was mine.
Yeah, I agree. Mine's similar. I would say the crying. When the kid cried, I'd feel guilty that I wasn't necessarily reading his cues soon enough, or, moments like
as a baby.
Yeah. And even when they get older, even now when they're crying, like you said, when they're crying because you're leaving, that's getting an older age too. So that crying, that guilt that you can't stop them from crying. And I think for me, what I realized over time was that I wanted them to always be happy and never experience any emotions outside of feeling really good and happy. Right. And it sounds kind of crazy as I say it outside. Have no one ever feel an emotion besides happiness. It's not going to happen. But I think that really, when I kind of realized that aspect of it, of why I was so intense about not wanting him to cry, and then also how that reflected back that I was a bad parent because I couldn't read what they wanted. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't get them to stop crying. I couldn't get them to comfort, or I had to, in your case, I had to go to work or whatever. Mine was crying, which sounds very similar to yours too. So
yeah,
I think
yours sounds more crying just for anything. Mine was specifically when it was the mommy, the don't leave. And actually more toward older ages when it was very obvious it was about me leaving versus younger ages. But yeah, I mean, there's a million and two things that I've felt guilty for, but that was probably the hardest, I feel like, that to deal with for myself.
And I think that is a big one too for a lot of parents, is leaving. And I think we talked about it in an episode that first, leaving your kid, a lot of that is surrounded by guilt. We feel that we need to be.
Well, it's natural. There's an attachment. And unfortunately, in the US, our society is not set up to support the attachment space for parent and child really very well.
Yeah.
So we do our best. Coming back to we do our best.
We do our best. And naturally, if you think about it, I mean, now with our modern world, it's a different story, but from a more natural genetic point of view, kids depended on us to survive because we were their warmth. Women can provide warmth, like just by covering their baby, they'll match their temperatures. They provide breast milk, like their whole life. And so separate that, I'm sure is also, there's genetic,
biological,
biological aspects to it too.
Just know that guilt will come. That's all. Just know it will come. And hopefully this episode gave you some resources or tools or ideas on how to surrender to guilt and how to love your guilt and approach it with intention and love. I think that's my takeaway. Just approach it with intention and love and move through it like any other emotion. So,
and know we're not perfect.
I think know that we're not perfect. You're doing the best you can. You're doing a great job.
You're doing awesome.
Yes.
You're doing amazing. Yes. Hey there, amazing listeners. We just want to say a huge thank you for tuning into our convo on the Just This podcast today. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and your continued support means the world to us.
If you enjoyed this episode and found value in it, we would be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform or share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it too. Your reviews and shares not only motivate us, but they also help others discover our show.
We're also all about keeping the conversation going and hanging out with our incredible community. Head over to justthis.site, that's justhis.site, where you'll find additional resources, ways to connect with us, and join the conversation, plus some more goodies.
Thank you again for being a part of the Just This community. We'll be back soon. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself and embrace the wonder as you navigate this extraordinary adventure.